How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? What's the real truth about Citizen Kane?
It'll probably turn out to be a very simple thing.
Hey everybody, we hope you're doing well. I'm Parker.
And I'm Max.
And welcome back to another episode of Better Than Citizen Kane, the highly subjective show where we look at a movie and ask that titular question. Because when every movie ever made is a reasonable contender for the title of greatest film of all time, you have to wonder, better than Citizen Kane.
The last in your Spotify search results, but the first in your hearts, and that's the truth. I have today's forecast for you. Hot. Because we're talking Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, 1989.
Very nice.
Parker knows this. I went through so many iterations of the intro, and one of the final choices I made was whether or not to include Ruth. Mm-hmm. I opted not to.
I think this is clean.
I thought this was clean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well organized, perhaps.
Not to say that the movie itself, or this exact line from Samuel L. Jackson's character in the movie, is not clean. Just saying, for the podcast intro, I think it's a great movie. Parker, welcome to our episode on Do the Right Thing.
Thanks for having me.
I thought I'd welcome you.
Glad to be here.
From the East Coast itself, which is where I am today.
Yes.
Yeah, I watched this for the first time. I chose the movie for the podcast, even though I'd never seen it and you had, because I wanted to force myself to watch it. Not because I had been putting it, like we've talked about before, I wasn't putting it off for any particular reason. It was just, I just hadn't seen it yet, somehow. And the podcast is a great way to just get some things off the list, the old watch list, you know? I chose this, and then it just so happened that I watched it for the first time in a basement in Brooklyn during a heat wave.
Amazing.
And that was pretty cool. So, that's my history with Do the Right Thing. I knew things about it. I know things about it. I'd seen it on your shelf of Blu-rays, because I know for a fact that Parker has seen this movie before, but I don't fully know your history. Parker, what's your history with Do the Right Thing?
It's one of those movies that I had kind of heard about for a really long time. And similar sort of thing to you, like I was like, I'll get to it eventually, and just kept not getting around to it. And then, just a couple years ago, just had kind of a free Saturday and decided, I was like, you know what, watch this. I haven't checked this out yet. And it was amazing. Like immediately I was like, okay, like the next Criterion sale was maybe a couple months after that, and it was immediately like, okay, grabbing that, have to make sure I get that. Yeah. I got like, I really like the copy that I have. Like it's a very nice, kind of like, it's like a boxier cardboard set that they do once in a while. It's got a big fat booklet with the Criterion essay by Vincent Cunningham, and then an excerpt from Spike Lee's like director's journal.
Nice.
While he was filming it. Very cool. Very cool stuff. But yeah, so I'd watched it then and just have not stopped thinking about it since I watched it a couple years ago. And I think this was my review of it the first time, and it still absolutely holds true. I'm just like, I'm really tired of movies that were made 30, 40 years ago still just being so prescient and relevant, and I'm getting tired, man. I'm getting tired.
Yeah, this is a film that has not aged really at all. It is in
not a bit.
It's just as relevant, just as kind of condemning and powerful and thought-provoking as it was 35 years ago, 34 years ago, 35. Yeah, couldn't agree more, and that's very unfortunate. But it does make for a really, it's a great film.
It is. It is a great film.
End of the podcast. End of the episode.
That's it. Wrap it up.
Oh man.
Well, I have some research that I've put together, which I'd love to share.
I would love to hear.
And then once I've got the research done, would you like to tackle the summary?
I sure can, Parker.
Marvelous.
Everyone ignore the sound of me searching the summary. I'm notoriously not great at summaries, but I'm going to do my best.
I believe in you.
Thank you, Parker.
So, we've got a little bit of background on this. This is Spike Lee's third feature film. He'd been doing a lot of music videos at the time, and before this were his two films. His first film, She's Gotta Have It, and then his second film, School Days. And then followed up by this, and those kind of line up. So She's Gotta Have It is 1986, School Days is 1988, and this Do the Right Thing is 1989. So that's kind of his trajectory, with quite a few music videos in the middle of all of that. Kind of started cutting his teeth doing those, making a name for himself. He began writing this on Christmas Day of 1987. Originally, it was called Heat Wave. I couldn't find exactly when the title switched, but eventually it did. In his director's journal, there's a very interesting little note that he has about just kind of the inception of the concept. So he says, quote, "It's been my observation that when the temperature rises beyond a certain point, people lose it. Little incidents can spark major conflicts. Bump into someone on the street and you're liable to get shot. A petty argument between husband and wife can launch a divorce proceeding. The heat makes everything explosive, including the racial climate of the city. Racial tensions in the city are high as it is, but when the weather is hot, forget about it. This might be the core of a vicious climax for the film." If you get the chance to ever check out like his director's diary, it's very interesting. Like, because they'll make comments like that where he's like, yeah, this might be the core of like a climax. And like you see him kind of piecing it together bit by bit as he goes, which was really interesting. But there are two main kind of inspirations for the film. The first being, and they talk about it in the movie actually, a big inspiration was the incident known as Howard Beach. So on December 20th, 1986, a mob of 12 angry white men chased down and beat 3 black men who had just left a pizzeria in the predominantly Italian-American community. During the pursuit, the force mobbed one of their victims, Michael Griffith, to run onto the Belt Parkway where he's hit by a car and killed. So Lee talks about how this protest led to, this event led to protests led by Reverend Al Sharpton and the call for all African Americans to boycott white-owned pizzerias, which was sort of kind of his inspiration for all of this. So the night that this happens, he sits down with Robert De Niro, who is a friend of his, and they were just kind of chatting about all of this stuff, of the tensions that existed between Italian Americans and African American communities. And that served as kind of one piece of the puzzle for all of this. The next one was, he talks about, in like the making of documentary about the film, he talks about how there was an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents that he remembers watching. It's called Shopping for Death. And basically it's this guy who observes that violent tendencies peak the hotter it gets. And he's like, observed that he's like, hey, once it passes 92 degrees, like people's murderous intent goes like way up. And that's kind of the premise of this episode. And so he said that he'd watched that, and that kind of something was he filed in the back of his head of just like, yeah, there's something interesting does happen in oppressive heat and like how that affects people. He talks about the film In the Heat of the Night being an inspiration as well, of kind of, again, using weather as a stand-in for racial tensions and how that affects things. Yeah. Which I think is interesting. The Criterion essay by Vincent Cunningham is really well done. Highly recommend checking it out. But in there's a quote that he had that I liked a lot. And he says, "Sure, pigmentation is a problem. Of course. So are money and ownership and distant melting ice caps and the Celtics and sublimated sex and fragile patrimony, and amplifying everything, the hallucinogenic Brooklyn heat surrounding, sometimes suffocating, Lee's characters like loud music." And I love that was the like my biggest takeaway from the film the first time I watched it, is just the atmosphere of the whole thing. Yeah. Like, it's hot to look at, it's hot to listen to, like it just, suffocating is such a good word for the mood of the movie. And it's not to say that it's like a miserable slog, right? Like it's joyful, there's moments of community, but there is there's this overwhelming tension. There's this overwhelming heat.
Well, it's interesting. You think of when a heat wave does hit, and you think of like the shimmering air. You know, when it gets so hot that the air shimmers. There's a sort of energy that this film taps into, which is almost replicating that like quivering air, but not literally physically, but like just in everything that it's doing. Like, I don't know. I feel like definitely that's kind of the energy that surrounds and envelops and suffocates, like you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think they do such a good job of that visually. So like something they did is that for this film, they went to a pretty rundown and abandoned block. And what they did is they came in and kind of started rebuilding it just for the purposes of the movie. Like in the documentary, it's really interesting where they're interviewing a guy who lives in the community, and he's like, I thought they were here like doing renovations. And I ran over to like say like, hey, like this is important to me. Like I want to help. Can I get a job? Like I'd love to work on this.
Yeah.
And they're like, this is actually for a movie. Like we're tearing all of this down after we leave. But like, he's like, no, like I still like, I'd love to be involved. And so he joined the crew, which was really interesting. But
Wow.
It was basically it was very run down and abandoned. The whole block was run basically by crack dens. Like that's
Wow.
what was going on. And it was very dangerous for the community. It was dangerous for the filmmakers, to the point that Spike Lee hired Nation of Islam's paramilitary wing, the Fruit of Islam, to basically come and protect the crew and help facilitate all of this while it was going on, because it was very dangerous for them to be there.
Wow.
But it was really good for the neighborhood because the Fruit of Islam came and they pushed the crack dealers out, and so they were able to build like all of the facades, and they added the radio station, they added the pizzeria was functioning. Like
Wow.
you could like it was an actual pizzeria that they would use for catering and things, which is cool. But the reason I bring that up is that the team wanted to, like, Lee talked about a lot with his team that he's like, okay, we know how to depict heat visually with like, claustrophobic camera work and sweaty brows and things like stuff that we've seen before. And he's like, I don't want to find a way of like extending that even further. And so what they did is that all of these brownstone facades on the block, most of them, like I said, were kind of, empty and, burned out on the inside. They weren't very livable. All the interiors are sets, but the exteriors, they came in, and to help instigate this feeling of heat, they used really vibrant, earthy colors. They, that like really bright red wall where the three guys are sitting and talking, like they came and painted that.
Right.
There's a lot of oranges on the facades, a lot of like very earthy, bright tones to add to a sense of like heat. There's not a lot of cool tones in that set design on the exteriors, which I think is really interesting. Additionally, where was that? Okay, yeah. The cinematographer, Ernest Dickerson, to help create the look of like The Hottest Day of Summer, he would light a can of Sterno, which is basically canned heat. Mm-hmm. It's a can that you get, and then you light it, and it produces a fire, and you can use it to cook things and stuff like that. He would light a can of that and hold it under the camera lens so that the heat waves would be right next to it.
Yeah. That's great. That's super cool.
Yeah, because there's quite a few shots where you can see that, and like if you think about it too long, you're like, heat, like, there's shots of people where it's like chest upwards, and it's like heat waves would be much lower to the ground, right? But it's because they're holding an open flame directly below the lens.
Wow. That's really great. I love that.
Which is it's very cool. It's very interesting. Let's see what other stuff is. Okay, I've got a quote for later during the summary, kind of talking about the climax of the film that I'd love to go over when we get there. Let's see. Anything else of huge interest? Just a fun little piece of trivia I found. The word fuck can be heard in various forms throughout the film for a total of 255 times.
Wow. All right.
Which was apparently one of the highest numbers for any movie in the 80s. Let's see. Also, apparently, Frank Sinatra was not happy that his picture was included on the wall. And Years later, Lee said he wanted to use a piece of Sinatra's music in Jungle Fever, and the singer said, quote, "Hell no, you burned my picture and do the right thing." They eventually worked it out, but he was very upset that they burned his photo.
Wow.
He's like, that's interesting. Yeah, so that's kind of some overview stuff. I think... Oh, here's the one more piece that I thought was interesting. The role of Smiley wasn't in the script at all. The actor just came to set every day and kept pestering Spike Lee to put him in the movie, and so he improvised almost all of his stuff. He just he came up with a character. He was the one. He had the idea of sticking the photo up on the wall at the end, which Lee really loved. Yeah. So that whole character was kind of improvised by the actor, which was very interesting.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, so there's kind of the setting of the stage, and I have a few things that I'll pop in with as we go through the summary. But yeah, that kind of gets us rolling.
Cool. Yeah. So for those who have not seen Do the Right Thing and are listening anyway, Do the Right Thing, and also just as kind of a structure so that we can talk about things that we like in the movie. Do the Right Thing follows Mookie, who is played by the writer and director Spike Lee. And he is a young man living in a black and Puerto Rican neighborhood in Brooklyn. He lives with his sister Jade and works as a pizza delivery man for the local pizzeria. Which is Sal's Pizza, I think that's what it's called.
Yep, Sal's Famous
Pizza. It's owned
Pizza.
by Sal, who's this Italian-American owner who's been there for like 30 years, 25 or 30 years. And he runs it with his two sons, Giuseppe, better known as Pino, who is played by John Turturro, and then Vito, played by Richard Edson. And Pino is like blatantly racist and hates the place, and is kind of hates his job, hates where the restaurant is, and hates the community. And Vito is more of like friends with Mookie, and thus the brothers don't really get along because of that. Mookie's kind of casual with his job. He kind of takes as long as he wants to deliver pizzas, and he also has a young son with another neighborhood resident, Tina, played by Rosie Perez, who actually opens the film with an extended dancing. So there's an opening credits sequence of Rosie Perez in her first film role, her first role ever in anything, dancing. And that's the credit sequence. And it's pretty famous, isn't it? Right? It's like it kind of immediately became really iconic.
Yeah, it's a great opening title sequence. I love it.
Looks great, very cool. And it's one of the hottest days of the summer. So we open with Samuel L. Jackson's character, who is named some combination of Mr. de Senor de...
Mr. Senior Love Daddy.
There we go. Mr. Senior Love Daddy, who proclaims that it is the hottest day of the year. And that just kind of sets us up with everything. There's an old drunk called De Mayor, who is just kind of on the street. He's kind of like the street's drunk. He's trying to kind of win the affection of the neighborhood, like kind of matron, mother, sister. And this is all just kind of happening concurrently at the start as Mookie wakes up. He goes to work, but kind of has like a bicker with his sister about not going to work. He goes to work. He's late. And it's kind of... I mean, there is kind of a story, but it's more so told in just kind of building tension, right? So there's kind of these sequences of just kind of setting up all these characters. There's a young man named Radio Raheem, and he just blasts Fight the Power by Public Enemy on his boombox everywhere he goes. And he wears a love and hate four-fingered ring on either hand. And he has a moment where he explains what it symbolizes in the struggle between hate and love, which is from The Night of the Hunter, which is the movie that we covered previously. I think it's episode 16. We covered it previously on this show. Parker, when we watched The Night of the Hunter, you had already seen Do the Right Thing, right? So was it kind of like that's what this is referencing? For you when you watched that, or...
Absolutely, yeah, because it was one of those things that I knew the love and hate probably from Do the Right Thing first. Like, I was aware of that scene more than I was aware of Night of the Hunter, but I knew that it was referencing a different movie, even though I didn't know that, particular context. So yeah, when we watched that for the first time, I was like, oh, okay, it's this.
Yeah. And then kind of the last two characters here are Smiley, who is the mentally disabled man who's apparently completely improvised into the story. And he kind of walks around the neighborhood holding up pictures of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. It's this picture of them kind of laughing and together and shaking hands, maybe. And he hand colors these photos and sells them. And then there is Giancarlo Esposito as Buggin' Out, who is this young black man who walks around the neighborhood, and he talks about civil rights. He's very kind of involved in that and motivated as to that fight. And so, is there anything in this first little section before we get to kind of Buggin' Out entering Sal's shop that you want to talk about, Parker? Anything from that first little bit that really stands out to you?
There's I don't have the quote written down. I wish that I did, but that the Criterion essay opens talking about Radio Raheem's intro of he even walks in stereo. And like that's kind of the thesis argument for the whole essay, which I really love. But he talks about how like I love Radio Raheem's introduction at the beginning of this because rapid fire we're meeting all of our characters very quickly. It's here's our ensemble, here's the players, and Radio Raheem stands out from the rest in how he is photographed the first time we see him. He basically fills the frame, a lot of these are group shots of people hanging out together, and then the camera whips around and it's looking up at Radio Raheem, and the way that it describes it in the Criterion essay is like pieces of sky show up in that frame and everything else is him, It's just, he is overwhelming. He is enormous, both physically and in presence. And I really love that introduction with how his character plays into the rest of the story moving forward. But I think that's just, compared to all the rest of the character introductions, his stands out in the way that it's presented to us through the camera.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Let's see.
But yeah, I like that introduction a lot. I really like seeing, and this kind of bridges the gap from the earlier stuff to what you were talking about with Bugging Out arriving at the pizzeria. I like seeing Sal's complexity, because Pino is a little more one note as a character. It's kind of like, okay, this is the racist bigot. And, there's moments of like interaction. Like I really like the conversation he and Mookie have later where Mookie's like, all of your favorite celebrities are black people. Like, what are you talking about? Like there are complexities to Pino, but I really love Sal as an exploration of the complexities of this issue because he isn't one note. He talks about throughout the movie, he's like, I love these people. These people grew up on my food. I'm very proud of that. But also really doesn't like Bugging Out and has issues with him. And like, you can clearly see that he's not immune to the the racism that Pino perpetuates had to come from somewhere, right? Like hate is learned.
Yeah.
And I like that there's those layers to Sal that we see in this opening bit of seems like a nice enough guy. And then there's these flashes of really aggressive, upset, violent behavior from him that, warns you of things to come.
That really kind of comes up later. Not to kind of jump around, but I do love, I love that kind of note of like, you bring up like Mookie's conversation with Pino where he's like, your favorite celebrities are black. And he's like, they're not black in the way that you all are, which is like,
he's like
almost more of like a comment on like, I don't know, like there's kind of this notion of like how black entertainers and black performers have to exist within this certain, what white society demands of them is that they exist within this certain level of entertainment. And Pino certainly looks at them in that way, right? Of like, I mean, that's kind of the vibe that you get from how he talks about it. Whereas, like you're saying, like with Sal, like his notion of like, oh, I've been feeding these people. I love this community. I've been feeding them since they were kids. They've been coming here 30 years. He says that, but it almost feels like it's more based in what the community has done for him. And how he's like, oh, I came in and I fed them, I've raised them, of like almost kind of a point of pride for him, rather than respecting the community itself.
Yeah.
To the point that when Buggin' Out enters the pizzeria and questions Sal about why his wall of fame only has Italian Americans, like white people, on there, and says that he should put up black celebrities because the pizzeria is in a black neighborhood, and Sal is like, no. I'm never going to do that. That like Buggin' Out attempts to start boycotting. Like he's so firm in clearly having this kind of more subtle level of superiority over them, right? He's like, I provide. It almost feels like he's like, I provide for you. You don't get to make demands of me. Is almost kind of the vibe, which is a different sense of kind of these. I don't know. It's kind of a more complex sense of racism, like you were talking about, of like he might not even be super aware of that up until this point, right? When we'll get to that. We'll get to that a little later, obviously, when he has his confrontation with Radio Raheem. But yeah, I think that's a great point.
I did remember one other kind of important piece to bring up in this kind of opening section is we get introduced to the Korean corner store run by Sonny and Kim, and they are also in this group of people, and will kind of come up later, of a predominantly black community, and you have the Italian pizzeria, and you have the Korean corner store. I will say that the summaries I'm looking at really don't talk too much about so many of the specific little scenes that I liked, that I'm like, oh, I watched it too early. But yeah, I mean, even with the with that kind of introduction of the Korean, what is it, like a convenience store? Is that kind of what it is? Yeah.
Or is it, I think, is we have those three men who are sitting in front of the red wall, like you talked about, and they're kind of discussing the community and talking about, they kind of take jabs at one of them who's like, oh, what does he say? He's talking about like his job or something like that. What is it?
Well, the first time we meet him, he's talking about, they're all talking about how hot it is. And he's like, well, don't worry about it, because, heat's going to melt the polar ice caps, and then it won't be a problem anymore. Like, he's like, and I'm going to be in, he's like, and they're making fun of him. He's like, well, when I'm in my boat and your black asses are drowning, then that's going to be your problem. And I'm going to be sailing away,
And they're kind of like, where are you going to get a boat? Like, they're just kind of like laughing with him about that, kind of setting up another thing that has continued to remain super relevant. Over the last 30 years.
These three guys remind me of like something I wanted to talk to you about, of something you and I both love just in our own lives, but also in film, is like Community. And man, does this movie make me ache for Community so bad.
Absolutely. Yeah. Totally. The Community.
Just these three guys sitting on the corner shooting the shit. Like, it's great.
When was the last time you did that, Parker? You just sat on a corner and shot the shit. I don't think we've ever done that together.
I don't think so. We gotta shoot some shit.
We should do that. Yeah, next time we hang out, we're just gonna go sit somewhere and shoot the shit. Yeah, but they also have their scene where one of them gets really, they're not immune to the to the heat wave, as it were, and they kind of start, even before they get fully to the kind of racism montage, the slur montage. Before we get to that like sequence. They're even like, well, he shouldn't, that should be a black-owned place.
Because
that he shouldn't be here. And they kind of talk him down from that, right? Of like, hey, come on. Which is something that the movie also touches on in its climax as well.
Right. Like, ML is his name. He goes off on this rant about, he's like, they haven't even built up the boat for a year, and they have this thriving business. He's like, and we've seen so many black-owned businesses come and go in that corner store, and they're thriving. And he's like, either they're geniuses or we're stupid. And they're
Right.
like, I don't think it's that, man. They're like, I think it's just tough, you know? Like,
Yeah.
again, like you said, they kind of talk him down a little bit.
Yeah, that's kind of I don't so much of this is like I don't know, like
Vignettes.
vignettes that I don't remember the exact order of them, but that's kind of an important one. So Bugging Out leaves Sal's Pizzeria and attempts to start boycotting it. During the day, we also get the local teenagers who open up the fire hydrant, and kind of douse the other neighbors to beat the heat wave. And a man is driving down the street in his fancy car. And he's like, "You better not get it wet." And they're like, "Oh no, we won't." And then he starts driving through, and they splash it and get it super wet. He comes out, the police arrive, and he like waves down the police. And I thought this was really interesting in how these same police officers are the ones who later come back and do the whole climax and everything. But these guys are just kind of like, leave him alone, whatever. You don't even know who the culprits were. Like, which I was surprised about seeing it for the first time. You know, you see that and you think you know where it's going to go. Just based on, okay, this is like a white man who's like calling the police over on some, you know, some black youth who are ostensibly like, you know, disturbing the peace in a way, and like what the police might consider disturbing the peace. In reality, they're just like cooling everyone off with a fire hydrant. But I think the fact that it doesn't go there both set up tensions more, but also kind of alleviated that for me, because I didn't know what the ending of this movie was fully. I knew vaguely that I figured as much, but I didn't know. And so, I don't know, that was an interesting scene to me, in how the police kind of took their side, but not really. They're just kind of like, whatever. Like, you better turn off that fire hydrant. And they turn it off and like, don't turn it back on. We're warning you. And you get that sense of violence, but it's just kind of, again, under the surface. This movie has a great sense of keeping things boiling under the surface, and setting up all, like, the setting up of all the key players and everything. Like, it's really well paced, and it's really, I almost want to say, like, well mixed as far as, like, the characters and how, just when to, like, turn the dial on each individual player, you know?
Totally. Yeah. Also kind of an interesting little tidbit from that scene is the really tall, broad, white police officer with the mustache who comes in, again, at the end of the movie in a big way. That's actually the son of Sal's actor, Danny Aioli, his son, Rick.
Oh, okay.
Which, once you know that, like, if you look at them, it's like, oh, yeah, they look super similar.
Yeah, even just, like, thinking back on it, I go, oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Also, Jade, Mookie's sister, is played by Spike Lee's actual sister, Joey.
Oh, no
Joey?
way. Oh,
Joey
great.
Lee? Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. In here, we also get, again, Mookie's just kind of walking amongst the community, says hi to Radio Raheem, says hi to everybody, walks past. Kind of talks... Someone gives Demare trouble, right? At some point earlier on, and they kind of talk them down. Maybe that's later. Oh, sorry. These vignettes.
You're good.
But we also get him talking with Tina, and Tina can't really convince someone to babysit for her, so she's kind of watching their son. Yeah. Sorry. Again, I'm not doing a great job of the summary.
It's this one, again, like you said, well, it's a series of vignettes. It's a series of kind of just different events that happen. At a certain point, they go and deliver some food to Love Daddy over on the radio.
Yep.
And Mookie, he's like, hop on the mic. What do you want to do? He's like, well, I dedicate this next song to Tina. And that comes up later where he's like, is that not love? Is that not love to dedicate a song to you on the radio? Which is fun.
Yeah. What else happens in here?
Around this time, there's a moment where kind of the Hispanic group in Community is all hanging out, and Radio Raheem comes by, and they're listening to, music, and they have kind of a battle of the boxes, basically.
Yeah.
The boom boxes, yeah. And so, he cranks it up, and Radio Raheem just blasts him out of the water. Like, he's just so loud, so overpowering.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of just moment of, like, respect,
Yeah. Again, just, like, setting up all of these different communities that exist in one spot, who you get the sense of from their interactions that they all get along most any other day. Like you really get the sense, like you were talking about with Community, that like they just exist side by side and it's fine. But today is especially hot, and everyone's kind of communal idiosyncrasies are like rubbing up against each other, right?
Totally. Yeah, like everybody's on edge. And, like later on, there's a scene where, Mookie's out running. He's doing deliveries. Vito comes with him, and he's telling Vito, he's like, you really need to stand up to your brother. Like, he doesn't need to push you around like this. And, Vito's very wishy-washy about it, but he's like, yeah, all right, fine, yeah. And Bugging Out shows up. Bugging Out really doesn't like Vito, obviously. Like, he basically just ignores him and just talks to Mookie, and he's like, what's the white guy doing here? Like, what? And he's like, he's cool. Like, and that's something, again, the full quote I'll bring up when we get to the climax, but like Spike Lee talks about that. He's like, I designed Mookie to be fully palatable to white audiences.
Right.
Like, he should be the middle ground. He should be the point of reference. He should be, like, let me find the specific piece of the quote, and I'll do the whole thing later. But like, he talks about how, he's like, he's the character that, you wouldn't mind having come over to your house and not feel like you have to lock up the silverware or your color TV. He's like, he's designed that way. And we see a lot of that from him throughout all of this. If he is the peacemaker, he is constantly being like, let's cool it down, guys. It's fine. Vito's cool. He's chill, whatever.
Yeah. Even to the point that he's actively kind of, again, taking his time delivering pizzas, not in any particular rush. And when he gets back to Sal's, like, Pino keeps being like, he's not even working. Like, what are you doing out there? And Sal is like increasingly a little more like, come on, like, please, like, take this seriously. But also is still kind of letting him kind of get off with it, and kind of get away with it, right? He's letting him off the hook with it. Yeah, I think that's also like a good way of showing of like a key part of that. He kind of, what do you think about Spike Lee in this? I didn't know that he was actually in it before I started it. What do you think about his performance as Mookie?
It's interesting. I could not find in my research because I was curious to know, and I've been curious to know since the beginning of like, if there, because he'd done supporting roles in his other two films, but this is the lead, and I wanted to see if I could find any reasoning and an interview where like he talked about that. I couldn't find anything of like his reasoning of why he wanted to play Mookie, but I think he does a good job. I think his style of acting compared to the others is deliberately downplayed and very reserved.
Yeah.
And sometimes that works for me and sometimes it doesn't. Like, sometimes he feels very distant when everybody else feels very human. But overall, I would say I enjoy his performance.
But I would say almost that really works in this role in this movie because, like you said, like Mookie is the lead here, but he's also just kind of, again, like you said, like kind of passive and kind of distant and removed from everything up until the, like after the climax and like during the climax, right? Is like he's kind of a point of view character, which makes sense in how Lee would write and perform him in the way that he's like palatable, like he said. But like he kind of is just kind of literally walking us through this community, and we move away from him, we float to other people, we're watching them, and they have almost more to work with. They're, like you said, more kind of human and also just kind of bigger performances, but in a way that's like feels grounded. Whereas I don't know, there's this kind of tone to certain performers, and usually it's someone who's like maybe not an actor like first thing. Like if they have other things like director or writer or like another thing, and then they also do like acting. There's kind of this sense sometimes where they have this very specific tone to them. And I can't think of any other examples of this off the top of my head right now, that I always find really enjoyable in how simultaneously real and unreal the performance feels. Because they seem like a real person because they're not like, they're not like an actor first. And and yet also because everyone else is an actor first, they feel less real in the movie, but they're still like, I don't know, it's really interesting. I would love to actually make a list of other movies that have performances like that. But for me, I feel like I totally understand that it doesn't work in some scenes, but I feel like for this specific character, I found myself being like, no, this actually works really well to have your kind of let's cool it down kind of passive character be played by someone who's, not less of an actor in terms of, ability, but less of an actor in terms of what they prioritize in their career, before or after. I don't know, I just found that it really worked for me with the character specifically. Whereas it might not have worked if it was like, Sal is being played by someone who doesn't act very often as a lead. I don't know. That was kind of my feelings on it. But I was curious to know what you thought.
Yeah, I can totally see all of that, and I think you make a lot of really good points. It does have, like you said, kind of an unreality to it that works really well here. I do. I like his performance. I think he does a good job. Scrubbing through, one of my favorite scenes is when Bugging Out's Jordans get scuffed up by the one white tenant on the block.
Yes.
And that whole scene's just so funny.
The button on it is unbelievable. Like, I laughed out loud as he goes up, and they're like, go back to where you came from, or whatever, and he says, what does he say? He's like, I was born in Brooklyn. And they all just go, they all just like lose their minds. But it cuts. It's like a perfect cut on their reaction of like, oh, like,
yeah,
they
throw up their hands. It looks like a musical theater beat.
It does. It does. It looks like then they would go back into like a dance number or something. It's a
great button.
It's so great. I also want to give a shout out to all of the almost fisheye shots in this of just like, I think there's a really great sense of focusing on one person using that kind of close-up angle that's kind of wider than, is that the term we would use for that?
It's a fisheye lens.
Yeah, the fisheye lens usage in this is really fun, and I thought it worked really well. I just enjoyed seeing it. I always enjoy a fisheye lens.
Yeah, it's used very well here to like just convey a sense of claustrophobia and like getting in your face and like being there. You mentioned it before of the love and hate monologue. Yeah. It's my favorite camera move in the movie because it starts in like a medium 2 shot in their profile of Mookie talking to Radio Raheem, and when he notices the rings with love and hate, and he's like, oh, whoa, look at those. The camera swings inside to Mookie's POV, yes. And Radio Raheem talks down the barrel, down the lens of the camera, does the whole monologue. We swing back out to that 2-shot profile, and then they go their separate ways.
That's
and just
so cool.
It's all one take. I love that, like, just that feeling of us suddenly inside the conversation and then coming back out.
It's super cool. That's such a cool directing choice. I do want to, as we're kind of, I feel like we're getting close to just being able to talk about the climax overall.
Sure.
The one thing that does happen before this is that Mookie goes home to take a shower, which was just like, I don't know. I as someone who is so willing to be kind of rolled over in a workspace, I kept being like, you should really get back to the pizzeria. Like, and I had to kind of confront something within myself where I was like, why am I so, what does that mean about me? That I was like, should you really be going to take a shower? Like, are you like, I don't know, they seemed pretty, like I kept having that thought. Yeah. But he goes home and he reconnects with Tina. And there is kind of a sex scene in this. But I just wanted to speak to, at the time after the movie came out, Rosie Perez did speak about how she was really uncomfortable.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, which I was curious because I saw that your review went from a 4.5 the last time you watched it to a 5. And so I was going to ask you about that 4.5. And I was curious if it had anything to do at all with this. Or not. But, yeah, she was really uncomfortable with kind of the nude sequence, the nudity that she was required to do, and Spike Lee literally, like, rubbing ice around her chest and everything there, and it was just really kind of initially disheartening when I read that she was really uncomfortable with that. And then it seems that in the years since, they have made up about that, and that she's, you know, from what I read, it seemed that they are fine. She doesn't hold it against him, but it was something that initially she was uncomfortable with.
Yeah, that was my research as well, is that in the years since, she said that he's apologized and they seem to have worked it out. And it was interesting because Spike Lee's had a lot of very vocal critics throughout his whole career, a lot of them race-related, but one that I thought was interesting is that Bell Hooks, of all people, came out and said that she's like, his approach to black women isn't any different than the way that like white men approach white women in film.
Yeah.
Which I just thought was very interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I'd forgotten about that little detail, was that criticism was there. I do find that is something in this movie that I found myself kind of missing, was kind of that more female perspective, because you have 3 real like female kind of characters who have lines from outside of like an ensemble, right? Which is mother, sister, Jade, and Tina, right? Those are the 3.
Yeah.
And yeah, they are kind of, I mean, mother, sister is kind of she's the woman in the wrong. She's the matronly figure who, you know, is mad about Demare when everyone else is like, come on, be nice to him. He's just, you know, he's on the block. We like him. Jade doesn't have much to do except scold Mookie, from my memory. And Tina is there as kind of a sex object at a certain point.
Yeah, and Jade sort of becomes a further escalation of tensions, because Sal is very friendly with her. He's very, very kind, very doting on her. And both Mookie and Pino really don't like this. And like that's another really great shot, is you see those two interacting, and then it cuts to these like very gliding pans across Mookie's face in close up, and then Pino's just kind of glaring at what's going on. And
that's a good point. I'd forgotten about that.
So like that's, you know, and she does get a little bit more characterization than the other two, because Mookie tries to like strong arm her, and he's like, I don't want you. You're not allowed. Don't come around here anymore. I don't like the way Sal's looking at you. And she's like, he's fine. He's perfect. He's just nice. Like, you need to calm down. Like, you can't tell me what to do, you know?
Right. Okay. Yes. I had forgotten about that. Thank you for bringing that up. Otherwise, I think my read of the movie would be a little unfair. No, that's a great point about Jade, but overall, I'd be interested to, one, just, you know, watch other Spike Lee films, and also maybe look more into Bell Hooks' kind of criticism there, and just, I don't know, something to consider for sure.
Yeah, interesting for sure. You had asked about my 4.5 to 5 jump. My 4.5 was kind of a split between 2 things. One of them was that I had heard that I want to make sure I'm getting her name. I think it's Rosie Perez plays Tina.
Yes.
Rosie Perez. I'd read or heard somewhere that she had been uncomfortable with the scene, and that, like, once you hear that, it taints it when you know that kind of going in. But I hadn't heard that they had sort of reconciled, so that was part of it. And then the other part of it was, I think the first time I'm not crazy personally when filmmakers star in their own films. Like, it can work really well, but like, it's just one of those things that more often than not, it kind of rubs me the wrong way as somebody who is a director and an actor.
Yeah.
I like the idea of acting or leading in my own stuff or villainize stuff. I don't like that at all, but that's such a personal thing, which is where that kind of like 4.5 came from. I was like, I don't know that Spike Lee's the best choice for Mookie, but the second time around, I came around on his performance a lot more.
Yeah. Cool.
In answer to your question.
Well, thank you. Thank you for answering my question instead of dodging it and just ending the episode. Just saying, I don't want you to ask me that. End of the episode.
I thought about it.
Oh, well, of course. Only natural. So yeah, kind of going into should we just kind of head into the climax here? So Raheem goes into the pizzeria to order pizza and has his boombox playing fight the power really loud. Sal demands that he turn it down. And there's been, again, dropped something. There's been a lot of tension building. We've covered, I think, most of it, maybe out of order. But there's been believe it or not, there's been a really good sense of rise in tension that kind of leads up to Raheem entering the first time, and he turns off the music and gets pizza, right? Is that kind of how that first encounter goes?
Yeah, he begrudgingly admits defeat, turns off the music, wants the pizza.
Yes. Then, that night, we get, is that when the slur montage happens?
The slur montage is in the middle. I can't remember what the
middle?
inciting incident of that is. Let me see if I can find really quick, what kicks that off.
Because I'm pretty sure it starts with Mookie and Sal, right? Or is it, I think? Or maybe it's bugging. I don't know if Mookie does. No, I think it is.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, but it goes across town to all these different people talking to camera. The camera rushes in on them as they're just rattling off slurs.
It's Mookie against Pino, so it's against Italians. Not to Pino, but that's where the scene starts. Is Mookie and Pino are talking about.
Gotcha.
And then Mookie says a bunch of really racist things about Italians. Pino says a bunch of really racist things about African Americans. A Puerto Rican says a bunch of really racist things about Koreans. And then the owner of the corner store says a bunch of really racist things about Puerto Ricans. Or no, someone else against Puerto Ricans, and then the Korean store owner...
I think it's the cop.
Again, yeah, it's the cop. That's who it is. The cop against Puerto Ricans, and then the Korean store owner against Jewish people. Which is... It's kind of wild to just have someone break the fourth wall right down the barrel of the camera saying a bunch of slurs and racist lingo at the camera. But that leads to Samuel L. Jackson's DJ saying, y'all need to take a chill. Kind of like time out, right?
Yeah.
Which I, of course, saw for the first time in Parker.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
I feel like this is worth talking about. This is what our podcast specifically can offer on this, which is that Parker and I have both previously lived in Salt Lake, Utah, Salt Lake City, and there is a local theater chain there, and someone for the theater chain edits together montages of famous movie clips that show before movies advertising the chain, right? It's their version of what was the theater that did like
the AMC?
AMC's, kind of this is why we come to movies to cry. It's their version of Regal's awful quote thing.
It's so bad.
It's their version of Cinemark's like, I'm gonna get popcorn, hot dog, that thing. Their version is just this montage of film clips, and it changes. Someone has edited together a bunch of different versions of these. And I firmly believe that they know what they're doing. Because one of them had a clip of Voldemort's awful laugh from Deathly Hallows Part 2, and I go, you only put that in there if you know what you're doing is funny and ridiculous.
Like, the meme.
And it also ended with Soylent Green as people. That was the last thing that it would say before it went into the movie, which is a wild decision. But the most recent one includes Samuel L. Jackson saying, y'all need to take a chill. Like, time out, y'all need to take a chill. And was it you that was like, what is that doing in here?
Yeah, it's a strange inclusion.
It's an odd inclusion.
The rest of the clips, and also for the community they're catering to.
Like,
who have never seen an R-rated movie in their life.
Right, it's Utah. It's like, oh man, it's so funny. Anyway, so when that clip came up, I went, oh, it's just like the Larry H. Miller opener. That's great.
Quick aside, just because I think listeners will find this funny. Do you remember you and I went to go see Dune Part 2, and the location we went to had all of these playing in the lobby? There was a wall of TV screens in a pattern, and I was like, Max, it's every one of the promos. It's every one of the intros. And you just like... I wish I had gotten a picture of you, because like you just sat like it was the Blade Runner meme. You were just sitting there looking up at this wall of neon.
It was all six of them. It was like six of them, right? There were like six of them. Oh man, it's so funny and niche, and I want to know who that person who edits them is. I want to know how aware they are of what clips are what from what movies. How do you choose which ones? It's so funny. Oh man. And of course they're also thrown in with like current blockbusters. So you have like y'all need to take a chill, and then it's a clip from like the Super Mario Brothers movie. You know, that's how, or Godzilla X Kong. It's that. It's like that, and then y'all need to take a chill. Just really expert cinema. You know, it's exactly what Kuleshov was wanting when he invented the Kuleshov. You know, he invented it. Anyway, all right, that was a fun aside.
Back to the film. The kind of the slur montage. I just found what leads into it is their conversation with Pino and Mookie about black celebrities.
Okay, yes.
It's that. Then it goes
That's
straight
what I
into
thought.
that montage
Okay.
from there. Yeah,
Gotcha.
that's what kicks that off.
Gotta love the term the slur montage.
The slur montage.
In any other movie, but here, interesting.
Right. So, like you said, Radio Raheem came into the store at a certain point, had to turn off his radio. That evening, he's walking around and he runs into Bugging Out. And they kind of bond over their shared hatred and frustration with Sal's.
Yeah.
And Bugging Out encourages, like, hey, I'm trying to get a boycott, because he's been trying to get a boycott the entire movie, and everybody's been turning him down. Everybody's like, it's really good pizza. We like Sal's. Like, screw you. No, we're not going to do that.
Yeah. So they march in to Sal's. Does Smiley go with them?
So there's because Smiley also has been frustrated with Sal's because Pino was really mean to him earlier. And I love, like, one of my favorite moments in the movie is that they're closed for the day. Like, they are done for business. And Sal is like, we had a really great day, guys. Like, we made a lot of money. We made some people happy. And he's like, I'm going to rename it. I'm going to name it, like, Sal and Sons. Like, you guys are going to take over. And he's like, and Mookie, you're always going to have a place here. Like, you're like a son to me. Like, I love you so much. And there's a group of friends outside who really want a slice. And Mookie's like, we're closed. Like, go home. And Sal says, no, let him in. And he unlocks the door. And just that moment, I think about all the time of, like, how differently would all of this have played out if Radio Raheem and Bugging Out couldn't walk into the store, if the door was locked, if they didn't let them in, like, all these things. And it's all that one moment of Mookie being like, we're closed, like, it's done. And Sal being like, no, like, I'll make them a slice. Like, I love these people.
Yeah. We also have to mention, going into the climax, that there's a moment when Mookie is walking from, like, a house back to the pizzeria. He stops in by the mayor. By the mayor, sorry. Let me get the... It's spelled that way.
Mayor.
That's how he's credited. The mayor tells Mookie, he's like, hey, do the right thing. Mm-hmm. And I actually really like Spike Lee's delivery of Mookie's line, where he's like, that's it? That's all? Okay, got it. I'll try to remember that. Like, it's just so done. He's like, what is it? And he's like, do the right thing. He's like, is that it? Okay, great. Like, I'll see ya. Mm-hmm. But that's the title of the movie. So I just thought we should also mention that before we go into the climax. So, because they let the group in for pizza, Bugging Out and Raheem and Smiley can thus enter. And they march in with the boombox playing very loud. And they demand, they demand that the Wall of Fame include black celebrities. Right. And Sal demands that Raheem turn his boombox off. He refuses. Bugging Out kind of yells and badmouths Sal and his sons and threatens to shutter the pizzeria. And Sal grabs a bat, which earlier in the movie he said, I'm gonna, like, bash your head in about Bugging Out, right? Didn't he say that?
Yeah, he pulled out the bat earlier with Bugging Out.
Yeah.
When they were arguing.
He gets out the bat and he destroys Raheem's boombox. Yeah. And then Raheem immediately attacks Sal. Yeah. So his sons and the others struggle to get him off of Sal. Fight spills out into the street, attracts a crowd. While Raheem is strangling Sal, the police arrive, those same officers who break up the fight and apprehend Raheem and Bugging Out. And one of the officers chokes him with his nightstick. And everyone is like calling for him to stop. Mookie's there. He's also calling for them to stop. The other
At a
officer,
certain point, yeah.
the other officer even is like, all right, he's had enough. That's it. Like, be done. You know, stop it. He doesn't, and Raheem dies, and he kind of hits the ground, and kind of immediately attempting to like cover it up or whatever. The duo of officers place his body in the back of a police car, and they drive off. And that's how that goes.
Yeah.
And immediately there's a lot of grief, there's a lot of anger, and the crowd kind of blames Sal and his sons. And Demare is trying to like convince everyone, like, no, don't. And they're all just kind of arguing. And Mookie's sitting on a curb, and he's kind of just stunned. He's in shock from what just happened. And he's also like mad about what everyone's talking about and just all the arguing. He grabs a trash can and he throws it through the window of the pizzeria.
Okay, so here's the full quote from Spike Lee about all of this, which I think is really interesting. So he says, up to that point, I think a lot of the white audience, I think at that point, to a lot of the white audience, Mookie is one character in the film they can identify with. They're not gonna like Buggin' Out because he's a troublemaker, and they're not gonna like Radio Raheem because everybody has preconceived notions of these black youths, these angry, insane, raping, mugging black youths that terrorize inner city America, walking around with these giant radios with their rap music blasting. It would have been too easy to have somebody like this throw a garbage can through the window. So it's a big surprise, and we get you. Because throughout the beginning of the movie, Mookie is this nice young black character, the one you wouldn't mind coming over to your house and not feel like you have to lock up your silverware and your color TV. And then at the last minute, he's the one who throws the garbage can through the window.
Yeah.
And I find that just very interesting as a deliberate choice of, okay, the most palatable character I presented you with is the one who is going to incite this kind of violence.
Yeah. I don't remember what I was reading or where I was reading, but after I watched the movie, I was looking into it. And apparently at the time, there was a lot of like pushback from white audience. There's a discussion of like, well, did Mookie do the right thing? They're like, I think he didn't. I think that's, you know, because Demare is the one who's trying to like convince everyone that Sal's innocent. But it's also like, if you're questioning whether Mookie, who's like this main character, does the right thing by doing this, then you didn't get it.
Well, also, the movie is keeping that a question mark because it literally closes on two contradicting quotes from Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X.
Yes, which is like, right, it's like if you're asking that question and you're expecting an answer, like that's not what the movie's trying to do.
And
right?
And I've got those quotes and I'll read them when we get to the end. But yeah, just like, I agree, like, it's interesting. And something else that was interesting during my research was that like Spike Lee really was upset at critics because a lot of people were like, this is going to incite race riots in America. And he's like, that's such a racist line of thinking. He's like, I don't remember anybody saying that about the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie that came out. You know, like he's like, that's never been like, violence on screen has never been questioned except when it's about this. Yes. And he's like that. He's like, over the years, he's like, I've never let that go. He's like, it still bugs the shit out of me. Yeah,
totally. Yeah. So, he throws the trash can through, everyone kind of runs in, and they trash the place. They destroy it. Smiley sets the building on fire. And Demare kind of pulls Sal and his sons away from the mob. And they briefly turn towards Sonny's store, the corner store, preparing to destroy it too. And Sonny says, I'm black too. And they're like, no, you're not. And then who is it that kind of, I can't remember which character was it that kind of gets in the way?
I think it's Sweet Dick Willie. It's one of the guys from one of the three guys who was on the corner talking. Yes. And they're like, yeah, you're chill, man. It's, you know.
Which is like, I don't know, it's an interesting notion. Like, obviously his wording in that moment is not great, but like, it is like, you know, they're also...
Right. Like, the idea of bonding over being the oppressed minorities of the community, you know? Yeah. He's like, look, I'm not the one who killed that kid. You know, that was the cops, that was the white people. Like, we have to stick together is kind of the plea he's making to them.
Totally. Yeah. So they kind of, the group doesn't take that. And then the police return with the fire department and riot patrols to extinguish the fire and disperse the crowd. the firefighters turn their hoses on the rioters, which leads to more fighting and arrests. Smiley wanders back in and hangs the picture of one of his pictures of MLK and
Malcolm X.
And Malcolm X on the wall. And that's it.
Yeah,
fades
and
out there, right?
The image
For a minute
of when the firefighters show up is so poignant and fascinating to me, of like a burning building that desperately needs to be put out, and they have the methods to put it out, and the first thing they do is they turn it on all of the people when it's like, there's a fire. Like, and I get it, because like, you know, eventually like the rioters are tackling the, you know, firefighters and trying to prevent them from putting it out, but just like that initial image of them rolling up and spraying the people before they start spraying the fire is so, I don't know, loaded.
Oh, totally. Yeah. It's the next day. Mookie argues with Tina. He returns to Sal. He demands his weekly pay. And there's an argument. And then afterwards, the two cautiously reconcile. And Sal pays Mookie. And then, remember, Mookie gives the money. He throws half the money on the ground. He's like, no, you can take this.
Yeah, because he gives him, he's asking, he's like, I get $250 a week, and Sal gives him $500, and he's like, you're rich. Oh my God, everybody, like Mookie's a rich man, and he throws back two of them, two of the hundreds, and he's like, I owe you $50.
Yeah. But then doesn't he pick it up as he leaves?
I think I don't know. I'm pretty sure he picks up his 300 and goes, but maybe he picks up the other two. I don't remember.
I couldn't remember. I thought my reading was that he picks up the rest of it and then leaves.
The rest of the money.
But maybe I misunderstood that.
Let's see if I can find it really quick. But I do. So something interesting about this is that in the original draft of the script, there was a much stronger reconciliation between the two. Like it was a gentler scene. Apparently, like in that version, like Sal makes some comments similar to Demaire's earlier comments, and kind of, you know, hints at some sort of common ground and understanding why Mookie tried to destroy the restaurant, all this stuff. And basically, Lee hasn't come out and explicitly talked about why he changed the ending, but some notes compiled in like a companion book basically indicate that somebody involved with the production, like, you know, whether it was Lee or, you know, the team, said that they thought that Sal's reaction was just too soft. It was too nice. It was too understanding. And they're like, no, like, just let it be prickly.
Yeah.
Let it be tense, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that was the right call for sure.
Yeah. As we kind of leave, Mr. Senior Love Daddy dedicates a song to Raheem on the radio. Mm-hmm. And then before the credits, two quotations expressing different views about violence appear. Mm-hmm. One by Martin Luther King and one by Malcolm X.
Yeah, and I've got both of those.
Okay.
Yeah, so the MLK quote is, violence as a way of achieving racial justice is both impractical and immoral. It is impractical because it is a descending spiral ending in destruction for all. The old law of an eye for an eye leaves everybody blind. It is immoral because it seeks to humiliate the opponent rather than win his understanding. It seeks to annihilate rather than to convert. Violence is immoral because it thrives on hatred rather than love. It destroys community and makes brotherhood impossible. It leaves society in monologue rather than dialogue. Violence ends by destroying itself. It creates bitterness in the survivors and brutality in the destroyers. And then it's followed by this Malcolm X quote, which is, I think there are plenty of good people in America, but there are also plenty of bad people in America. And the bad ones are the ones who seem to have all the power and be in these positions to block things that you and I need. Because this is the situation. You and I have to preserve the right to do what is necessary to bring an end to that situation. And it doesn't mean I advocate violence, but at the same time, I am not against using violence in self-defense. I don't even call it violence when it's self-defense. I call it intelligence.
We watched this at such an interesting time.
Yes, we did.
That's all I'll say about that, to kind of keep on the film itself. It's posing a question. Mm-hmm. It's do the right thing. What is the right thing based on circumstance? Two of these kind of monumental leaders in Black thought and in like kind of these revolutionary civil rights movements had differing opinions, you know? And I can't believe that shot of the photo on the wall in Sal's was improvised. That's wild to me.
It's crazy.
I would have thought that was like a fundamental core pillar of the design of the film.
Right.
Because of how well it works. And because of the photo and then the quotes, like, it's the perfect film. Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
and that's why
I
bumped
say
it this
that
time.
with the asterisk for criticisms towards, Spike Lee's writing of women and,
Sure.
Rosie Perez at the time, contemporary complaints that she had about her experience. But the artwork itself is doing exactly what it's trying to do.
I agree.
Yeah. Do you have any final thoughts before we tackle criteria fully?
I don't think so. I think we've covered it.
Good movie.
Good movie.
Great movie. Okay, historical and technical relevance. Do we have anything on this?
I mean, it's a part of the National Film Registry. It's been deemed historically, culturally, or aesthetically significant in that way. It's interesting that the pop culture handoff switches of, I think more people know love and hate, right hand, left hand from this than they do from Night of the Hunter.
Totally. Yeah.
Which is interesting of just like the way that film history and reference works. I mean, it gets referenced a lot. It gets parodied a lot. Recently I saw, not that this really holds much sway, but just an interesting little tidbit of, in honor of the 35th anniversary, Giancarlo Esposito recreated the Jordan scuffing scene with just a bunch of his friends on TikTok or something.
That's awesome.
It was really fun.
I loved your review, by the way, that we should let Giancarlo Esposito do literally anything other than I'm a villain.
Yeah, please, he's so good in this. He's so good in this movie. Let him do
anything else.
Yeah.
Please.
And he's a good villain too. He's doing the Gus Fring thing very well.
He's very good at it, obviously. But I am it's kind of how I feel about Mads Mikkelsen as well, where I'm like, let him do something else.
Totally.
Do we have to keep? This was also, Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert ranked this as the best of 1989. And later it made both of their lists of top 10 films of the decade. Saying that it was closer to reflecting the current state of race relations in America than any other movie of our time.
I could have brought this up in the, note summary, but also it applies here. Just, it famously lost the Oscar. That was a big deal, that it was nominated for Best Original Screenplay, and it lost to Driving Miss Daisy, which just feels bad.
What's Spike Lee's quote from when Green Book won, and he's talking to somebody on the red carpet, and they're like, "What do you think about Green Book's win?" And he goes, "Are you British? Are you British?" And he goes, "It's not my cup of tea." And then he kind of laughs, he giggles, and he dances away. It's incredible. He,
it is. It's away. A really good little clip. But it was nominated for Best Original Screenplay. It was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for Danny Aiello. Who plays Sal, and he's really good. I think, I don't know. It is so definitively Spike Lee's kind of magnum opus in so many ways. It is kind of that, it's held up that way in regard, to the point that last night I asked Will if he wanted to watch it with me while I was here, and he had other plans. But he's like, which one are you watching? He's like, Do the Right Thing. He's like, who directed that? I was like, Spike Lee. He's like, that's what I thought. He's like, but that's the most racist thing in the world. If I know, like, I know what Do the Right Thing is, and I assume that I was like, okay, the one black director, yeah, Spike Lee. Which I just thought was funny. But like, I think that is, Spike Lee fills a certain like cultural and historical spot, and this film is kind of the calling card for him in that way. So I think you could make an argument. I would probably still say that Kane gets the point, but like there's an argument to be made, I think.
Yeah, I think it's one of the films we talk about where we go, this is very, a big moment in film culture and film history. But it is going up against the biggest thing in modern film history in a way.
Right.
So yeah, I think I'd still give the point to Kane, but I do want to say that this is there is a street in New York City named Do the Right Thing Way in Brooklyn. It is the only street in New York named after a work of fiction, and one of the only streets named after a work of fiction in the world. So there you go. That's pretty.
There
cool.
you go. That's very interesting. I didn't know that.
Great.
Yeah. Okay. So I think point to Kane there.
Yes.
How well is this movie doing what it's trying to do?
I think it does it perfectly. I think that's the perfect portion of this movie, is that it's doing exactly what it's trying to do. I think
Absolutely.
it the way it sets its tone, the way it makes like the heat tangible when you're watching it, the way that it sets up every character, turns up the dial on each character individually leading into the climax, how the climax goes out, right down to the quotes at the end. I think there are criticisms you can make, but I think as far as what Spike Lee set out to do, this is exactly what it was supposed to be, and it's perfect in that way.
Yeah, I agree. I fully enforce and second those notes. I think that it absolutely gets the point there.
Great.
How well are you connecting with this?
I connected with it in the way that it wanted me to. I liked Mookie. I thought that the jokes that are in it were really funny. I thought that the emotion of it when at the end, like the grief after Raheem is killed, I felt very strongly. Yeah, I really connected with it. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I would agree. Again, as soon as I watched this movie the first time, I was like, well, have to add that to my collection. Like, gotta have that movie. And it absolutely holds up on another watch. So yeah, I would also give the point there. So criteria says 2 against 1.
Yes.
Taking a step back, how we feel.
How do you feel about it, Parker? What do you think?
I feel pretty strongly that it's better than Citizen Kane, I think.
Yeah.
I think it is fully operating on a level that it wants to operate on. I think it is using so many of the techniques of camera placement that are pioneered by Kane and editing and things like that. And also it has, to be honest, I think it has loftier ambitions than Kane. And I think it hits those ambitions very well.
Yeah.
Being a social commentary and using, we talked about, this idea of, okay, if your goal, Spike Lee, was to make a movie where the hottest day of the summer is a stand-in metaphor for like the rising boiling point of racial tensions in the world, then I think he nailed it.
Yeah.
So that's how I feel. How do you feel?
I feel like it is better.
Okay.
I do want to say that before we kind of before we say the magic phrase that ends
Before we
the
put
episode,
the stamp on it.
Before we put a stamp on it, I do want to say that this is number 96 on the AFI 100, of which Citizen Kane is number 2, 3, so, or number 1 actually.
I think AFI
hasn't updated it since 2007, which is a conversation that I want to have later this summer when we watch a very specific movie. But number 96 on the AFI 100, it's number 55 on the Letterboxd Narrative 250. Citizen Kane does not appear on the Letterboxd Top 250. So just to put in perspective of what other communities the great scholars of our time, the AFI and Letterboxd. That's it's number 55, which is very high.
That is very high.
Not to say that we have to agree with what other people say, but I do want to say that this is the only film on the AFI 100 directed by a person of color. Number 96. Just want to point that out, since the AFI 100 is such a key player in this show that we have barely talked about in our episodes. But I do think that's very interesting. But all that's to be said. Parker, I'm going to let you take this one.
All right.
Stamp on it.
It has been officially decided by those whose opinions matter most.
Us
to
too.
random guys on the internet.
Absolutely.
That Do the Right Thing is better than Citizen Kane.
Applause. I would clap. I don't want to mess with the audio too much, but applause. And I'm sure everyone around the world who's also listening is applauding as well.
Throw the streamers, pop the popcorn.
Yeah, that's what I would expect. Kiss a stranger. War is over. I don't know.
All right, well, Max, what are we watching next time?
Next time is your pick, Parker. It's one of your picks.
Is.
It's our 40th episode. And it's... What is it, Parker? I know I just directed it right back at you, but what is it?
It is Portrait of a Lady on Fire.
Which I've never seen.
Another one that I'd forgotten you hadn't seen. I'm just like, man, you've got 3 in a row that you haven't seen. They're all great movies. Wow. Okay.
I know.
Exciting.
I know. I'm excited. I'm excited for A Portrait of a Lady on Fire.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.